The movie begins with Frank Leone working at a garage fixing cars. He's a great mechanic, and loves doing what he does. Sometime later, he is visited by a woman who asks to get her car fixed, and he begins to tease her. It turns out that this is Frank's girlfriend Melissa. They spend some time together, and later on, we see Frank playing ball in the park with some neighborhood children, as Melissa watches happily. He goes over and kisses her. Later, she drops him off at Norwood, where Frank is an inmate. Due to his model behavior, Frank is allowed frequent leaves from the low-security prison. A few years back, imprisoned for a minor crime, Frank had broken out of prison to go see his dying mentor. He did this because he was not allowed even an hour to go see him, and thus resorted to extreme measures. He reported this cruelty, and the prison's bad treatment of its inmates to the press, as he went back to being imprisoned again. But due to his model behavior and the press story, Frank was transferred to Norwood. As Frank walks inside, we see him being on good terms with all the guards and inmates alike. They all love him, and he has a positive disposition. That night though, things begin to go south for Frank, who is nearing the end of his sentence in 6 months. The prison is broken in by a different group of guards, who are extremely aggressive, and they enter Frank's cell. There, he is unceremoniously cuffed and dragged out.
You're being transferred. Transferred where?
The guards inform him that he is being transferred to another prison, and when Frank protests about not being told anything about this, the men unapologetically tell him that this is how they do things. Bewildered and helpless in the face of such a group of guards, Frank is shoved into a van and driven off to a high-security prison called Gateway. This is run by Drumgirl, who greets Frank as he is being brought in. Frank gets shocked to see the man, much to the warden's delight, and comprehends why he's been brought here. Drumgirl was the warden who hadn't allowed Frank an hour's leave to see his mentor, which had prompted Frank to break out. Drumgirl is clearly out for revenge, as Frank is shown to his cell, and given the rundown of the strict rules by the head guard Meissner. Frank walks around angrily in his cell, as he's taken to meet with the warden. As the two come face to face, Drumgirl talks about how he's been waiting for this day for a long time. Ever since Frank had broken out of his prison, Drumgirl had to face the backlash. His previously pristine reputation was blown to smithereens. He was demoted and transferred to Gateway. While all this was happening, Frank was lauded as if he was a national hero, and Drumgirl blamed Frank for the downfall of his career and reputation. Frank is pissed off at this, and retorts that whatever Drumgirl is going through, it's because of his own actions. If he had allowed Frank an hour to visit his mentor, Frank wouldn't have done what he did. But Drumgirl says that Frank was the one who broke the law, but he was the one who suffered for it. Frank says that he suffered too, being sentenced to 5 years more. Drumgirl says that Frank's suffering isn't over yet. Frank is then sent to be deloused. He is humiliated and stripped by the guards, and told to step into a chamber. They tell him that the chamber will be filled with gas, and he has to hold his breath for 30 seconds, as the gas is too dangerous to be inhaled. But after that time is over, Drumgirl intervenes, and lets the gas sustain for a longer period of time, during which Frank coughs and breathes heavily. The next day, he enters the yard and meets some of the other inmates. One of the inmates is the bully of the schoolyard, and has possibly been told by the warden to make Frank's life hell. He tries to provoke Frank by taking out a pocket knife. But this is seen by a guard called Meissner, who steps in and demands the man to give up the shank. When Meissner can't find it even by searching him, he turns to Frank and asks him about it. But Frank doesn't want to get into the whole thing, and says that he's not interested. Later on, while he's cleaning the floors, he is approached by Dallas, an inmate who was with Frank at his previous prison. He wants Frank to help him break out of here, as he believes Frank is very capable. Frank, on the other hand, isn't interested and turns him down. Dallas then takes him to see Eclipse in the garage, because he knows Frank is a great mechanic, and promises to get him a job there. But Eclipse wants no trouble and doesn't trust Frank. He tells them to get out of there despite Dallas's protests. Later on, Melissa talks to the guards at the reception area. She wants to see Frank, but the guard there tells her she can't, as he's in the general population at the moment. Meissner arrives and tells her that Frank is fine. She demands to know why he was transferred despite being a model prisoner, and he replies that it was just a routine transfer. In the next scene, Frank is seen cleaning a piece of machinery, when Dallas finds him again. Dallas has gotten a hold of some blueprints, and has an escape plan. He tells Frank that there is a pipe they can escape through, and then after that climb a smaller pipe to get to the roof. Frank good-naturedly dismisses Dallas's plan, because the pipe Dallas proposes they crawl through is hot enough to fry them up. During lunch, Frank spots a young unseasoned-looking inmate sitting alone, and joins him along with Dallas. The guy is known as First Base, and tells the men that he doesn't want to be a part of their group. Just then, they see an inmate stab another inmate with a knife, and walk away casually. Frank tells First Base that the only way to survive this prison is to stick together. One day, Frank and First Base are hanging out in the yard, when they are provoked into playing a game of football with Chink and his buddies.
I'm gonna get wet. Said you my laundry, bro.
Frank is roughhoused, but is otherwise a good player. Watching this play out, Eclipse gets angry at Frank being outnumbered and beaten up by the men, and joins in. The two of them win the game, and later on, a fight breaks out, which is stopped by the guards. This earns Frank Eclipse's respect, and he invites him to work at the garage. When Frank shows up, Eclipse shows him around, and they come across an old Ford Mustang. It's a great car way past its glory, and Frank offers to fix it up. He works hard on fixing the car, displaying his skills and determination, and is also joined by his new friends Dallas, First Base, and Eclipse. Together they fix up the car and give it a fresh coat of red paint, and later, celebrate their success. First Base and Frank are hanging out in the car, when Frank teaches him to drive, and lets him drive around the garage. There he is ultimately stopped and pulled out, but Frank is the one who gets in trouble, because Drumgoole just wants any excuse to beat the poor guy up. Frank is taken to solitary confinement and tortured for days. He is treated unfairly and beaten by the guards. Meissner gets angry when he finds out what was happening and berates the guards. He lets Frank out and even apologizes to him. He takes Frank to his cell and also gives him Melissa's letters. The letters were not given to him on orders of the warden, but Meissner felt the unfairness of this and took it upon himself to get them to Frank. When Frank visits the garage the next day, his friends are angry on his behalf. But Frank tells them to cool it, because his sentence will end in 21 days, and he can make it through anything Drumgoole throws at him till then. But Drumgoole has other plans. The warden wants an excuse to get Frank in trouble with more time, so he can extend Frank's sentence. So he allows prisoner Chink and his bullying friends to kill First Base in the gym.
I told you.
Frank fights and defeats Chink, but he spares Chink's life because he knows that's precisely what Drumgoole wants. Drumgoole, who has been watching this, gets angry when Frank doesn't kill Chink and foils his plan. But one of Chink's men stabs Frank with a shank. While Frank is recovering in the infirmary, Melissa is allowed to visit him. Drumgoole allows her 30 minutes to spend with Frank, but only a few minutes later, a few guards come in to escort her out. Later, Frank is visited by an inmate who was at Treadmore. He tells Frank that he will be released tomorrow, and the first thing he'll do after getting out is rape Melissa. He shows Frank Melissa's picture, driving Frank into a helpless rage. He leaves, and Frank calls out to a guard to let him make a phone call, but he is denied. Enraged and out of options, he goes to Dallas and asks him to help him break out. Dallas tells him he shouldn't do this, as he only has 6 days left of his sentence, but Frank says he does not have that long. Dallas agrees and they come up with a plan. That night, Frank overpowers a guard and runs out of the cells, followed by Dallas. They crawl through a narrow space and come to a crossroad. Frank thinks they should run one way, but Dallas insists they go the other. But Dallas leads Frank into a trap, where Drumgoole is waiting. The sadistic warden gloats that now Frank can be given a 10-year-long sentence for attempting to run away for the second time. It was his plan to make Frank believe that his girlfriend was in danger. Dallas, who has betrayed Frank, asks for his promised reward, which was that he will be released from his life sentence, but Drumgoole denies him that. He has him beaten and thrown into a pool of water. He leaves, and the guards start to beat up Frank, who fights back and defeats them all. He is about to save Dallas, who apologizes to him, when one of the guards who had fallen in the water grabs Frank. Dallas saves Frank's life by putting a wire into the water, electrocuting both himself and the guard. Frank begins to run, and has the security think he's running away from the prison. As they look for him outside, Frank turns up behind Drumgoole and drags him to an electrocution chair. He tapes his hand to the switch. If he is shot, his hand will trip the switch and electrocute the warden. Meissner and the guards arrive, and Frank makes Drumgoole confess his entire scheme. He then pulls the switch, but nothing happens, revealing that he had powered it off, and just wanted Drumgoole to confess. Meissner has Frank taken away, but also takes Drumgoole into custody, despite the warden insisting that he was merely playing along. An inquiry is made into Drumgoole's actions, and Frank is allowed to leave prison at the end of his previous sentence. He meets up with Eclipse one last time, who gives him a cigar. Captain Meissner walks him out, as Frank jokes that he will miss the captain's smile. Meissner shakes his head and lets Frank out, who finally walks out of Gateway and embraces Melissa. The end.